do the honors of introducing Carlos to us subsequently. But yeah, so Caio comes to us. He's a PhD student in Brazil, and has been working with Charles Monteiro, who I see is in the room, who's also a historian of photography, working on documentary photography in the 70s and 80s. One of the things I thought I could say that might be of interest to our graduate students is a couple of things about Caio's career. One is his work as a history high school teacher. And, I don't, I'm sure this is something you could speak to in depth, but, my guess is that this is a way to support yourself that can be, very useful for your own scholarship. That you're constantly talking about history, you're putting things in a historical frame and framing that. So as students, struggle with different ways to support their careers, this could be a really viable path. The other thing is that Caio has, maybe a dozen or so articles out already, many of them focused on a single Brazilian journal, a weekly news magazine called Veja, or Look, and particularly focused on the 1970s, photojournalism in the 1970s. So really, as a advanced PhD student, consolidating your area of research and knowledge around a single rich and generative topic like that seems to me to be an excellent way to pursue your area of study. The only last thing I'll add is that it's been great for me to be working with Caio. We've talked independently, but he's also participated in a couple of classes now. And it's great to have his perspective piped in from Brazil, contributing to seminar discussions and so on. And so I'm really looking forward to the way in which his project, as it continues to come into form, the way it will come into, we'll get a sense of that today, I'm sure. And so I'm looking forward to how it matures as a project. And then the last personal note I would say is it's also near and dear to me to be in dialogue with Caio, because he is somebody who grew up in Porto Alegre, I believe, right? Is that correct? Yeah. And so when I was in high school, I was an exchange student in a small city near Porto Alegre for a year in the 1970s. So, being able to say things like, so go, xoche, which is, various kinds of slang that I picked up during my years as a high school exchange student. And just to think back on that period of my life, which was, very formative for me, of course, in lots of different ways, has been near and dear to me. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Caio.
All right, Blake, thank you for your words. Hello, everyone. So my name is Caio Proença, and today I will present a little about my development of my doctoral thesis in history. At the moment, I live in Brazil. I work as a history teacher here, and I have been developing research that relates the use of oral history and the analysis of photographs taken in Brazil at the end of military dictatorship. So I will share my screen with you and we can begin. Let me check here. Can you guys see?
Yes.
All right. So I'm very grateful for the invitation to present in this colloquium to all the professors at the department, especially Professor Blake Stinson, for his lectures and insights regarding my research. Thanks to Atakan and Manuel for the contact and organization this week. I am a visiting scholar in the department at the moment, and my academic trajectory has always been focused on the use of photography in the media. Currently, I have focused on understanding the development of photographic works that circulated in Brazil during the 1980s and 1990s, in a period when neoliberalism was acting strongly at the end of military dictatorship that our country had. This academic trajectory passes through some university and people important to me, like my PhD advisor, Charles Monteiro from the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio Grande do Sul in Porto Alegre. In addition to this university, I participated in seminars promoted by the University of Manchester and at the Universidad Nacional de Córdoba in Argentina, which contributed for my formation. In this trajectory, I got in touch with several Brazilian photographers, mainly because I was working at the time as a professional photographer, and I talked to them about how their work was developed within this historical moment in our country, with the very special focus on photos taken during the 1980s and 1990s. In these conversations, I realized that much could be used in writing the history of photography in Brazil. And since then, I have carried out structuring interviews with these photographers to understand their training, belonging to certain generations, the change of visuality in their work, and which ways Brazilian society has also changed their careers. At this moment, I realized that the end of military dictatorship in Brazil lasted from 1964 to 1985, sought to consolidate the neoliberal model in our country, greatly affecting the photographs that were taken here and themes that permeate the work of photographers who promoted who photographed from 1980s to 1990s, creating images already known to many people, photographs in color and black and white, which circulated and were observed by people inside and outside Brazil. Some of them seeking insertion in artistic environments when their main support was still weekly information magazines, images often made under the sponsorship of large neoliberal corporations about misery, social inequality, hunger, poor distribution of land, and themes that are common to social exploitation in countries under dictatorial and neoliberal regimes. One of the best known names within the system is Sebastião Salgado, which I believe some of you already know. So I would like to share with you the context in which this work is inserted in my academic trajectory. I will talk about the photography panorama in Brazil in late 70s and 80s, and then my presentation with some names in photography that are still active today. Here we have the presence of the photographer Carlos Carvalho, who is in Portugal right now. I think it's 10 p.m. over there. So thank you, Carlos, for being here with us. I will give the word after I speak, and I will also talk about his trajectory and his photographic work, which represents to me as a research of history of photography here, a counterpoint to this neoliberal system where some photographers were inserted in the past. I am using, during this presentation, the notion of photography as not divisible simply by documentary practice and art photography. As Professor João Roberts wrote, the photography is understood by me in its overwhelming embodiment as a social relation between photographer, world, image, and user in an endlessly englobing and organization process in which representations of self, other, we, and the collective are brought to consciousness as part of every social exchange and struggle. Let me check here. Okay, when I was doing my master's in history, I tried to understand how the weekly news magazines used to work, use the work of photographers. They were magazines that emerged within the military dictatorship. One of these magazines was Veja. Veja was a magazine aligned with the Brazilian military government, whose main reference was the North American magazine Newsweek. I sought to understand what the practice of photographic editing was like in these magazines, what the daily life of photographers was like, and the reason why some photographs were not published on their pages, many of them loaded with political meanings. I had access to photographers' contact sheets to analyze these visual constructions within the magazine, as well as talking directly to them, who are now 60 or 70 years old. I traveled to different regions of Brazil to collect oral sources for my research, culminating in this study of perception of choices, creation of narratives, and constructions of meanings within the pages of magazines. In addition to Veja, I also analyzed Isto É magazine, its rival at the time, initially inspired by Esquire magazine and later inspired by Newsweek. Both magazines had a group of photographers who produced images for their subjects. The big difference was how these photographers were taken in both magazines. In Veja, the photos were more directed to the eyes of a conservative middle class, photograph that shows little about Brazil's social problems, student manifestations and strikes. Veja was more focused on images that would illustrate the arguments in favor of the government, arguments in favor of banks, and the entire liberal system that supported the magazine. Isto É magazine was economically more fragile, had a staff of freelance photographers who were working in photo agencies in Brazil. They owned the negatives, the authorship of their images, and the control of which images will be published or not within the various media, the Isto É magazine included. It was this moment that the figure of the ex-president Lula appeared for the first time in the press, and the manifestations were wide open for the entire national territory to read and see in the magazines. Thus, I was able to observe again contact sheets that presented the photographic practice, not so explored within the magazine, but circulated in other ways throughout Brazil, such as in photograph books. Several photographs from this period came in contact with each other, both for their compositions and for their context. It was common for photographers in this period to seek their own references in the constructions of these magazines, as is the case of Tarsila do Amaral painting with the context of industrialization in Brazil. However, at the end of 1970s, this type of image had its own main theme, the precariousness of this model, starting in 1930s, indirectly denouncing the crushing of working classes before capital. It was common for Brazil to have a different image in foreign press, as is the case of Newsweek's report, pointing out failures of the military government and pointing the success of the military, pointing the failures of military government and a political renewal with rising leaders like Lula here in Brazil. Meanwhile, magazines from Brazil pointed the success of military government and tried to diminish the image of this new generation in politics. Brazil was experiencing some kind of information bubble, and photography was an ally to the system, mainly due to the lack of control that photographers themselves had over their material. There were no magazines in Brazil that dedicated spaces to photographers who were covering material or international events in long and medium term, as is the case of Susan Mezelas, for example, with her coverage of Sandinista struggle in Nicaragua, which was published extensively in New York Times Magazine and other magazines with more space for photography. However, this was a strong desire for Brazilian photographers. In early 1980s, several independent photographic agencies were formed in Brazil, so they were looking for more control and possession of these photographs. His negatives struggling in Congress for labor rights and professional recognition. So Susan Mezelas is an example. Sebastião Salgado was already doing this path outside of Brazil, and many other photographers from Magnum Agency inspired these freelance photographers here during that time. Brazil experienced a period of low minimum wages after the oil crisis, further strengthening the scenario for labor exploitation, which became cheaper for private companies over the following decades. The growth of income concentration occurred in the 1980s as a consequence, further increasing social inequalities. Brazil's external indebtedness grew during the dictatorship, making even more the presence of strikes and manifestations in the cities against the increase of cost of living and calling for the end of military dictatorship. This scenario was a theme for photographers to explore the hunger, misery, and social inequalities here. So they try to organize themselves with the government itself, paradoxically, creating the National Institute of Photography and creating independent agencies all across Brazil. This change was an opportunity for some of the photographers that used to work as a photojournalists to focus on documentary in long-term projects sponsored by international banks, the government, and NGOs. During the 1980s, the National Institute of Photography, together with the Vitae grants from a financial group of Liechtenstein, distributed sponsorships to Brazilian photographers, supporting medium and long-term projects. Therefore, some of them managed to implement their projects without depending on the jobs in newspapers and magazines. Other photographers sought alternatives in the United States, mainly through the Guggenheim Foundation, with grants of 1 to 2 years of duration. This incentive did not last long. I believe that what capitalism dislikes about photographic documents is precisely this uncontrollable volatility of the photograph, in which even images that are supposedly secure within the very heart of the system spill out to be used and reframed by others to defame and embarrass the state, particularly in a world now dominated by instant image transmission. The Brazilian government participated in this movement with several important names for Brazilian photography, which are organized in order to promote photography in cultural and artistic spaces in different regions of the country. Thus, the National Institute of Photography was created with the objective of consolidating the training of new photographers, giving visibility to photography work and in artistic and museological spaces. So in this slide, we can see the regions of Brazil, and each of these book covers that was published by the National Institute of Photography. Within a decade, the National Institute of Photography promoted events in all regions of Brazil, creating themed photographic books for each of these regions, exhibitions of photographers from these regions, and events aiming at teaching photography. This scenario lasts until the 1990s, when the dictatorship ends and the Brazilians voted to neoliberal leaders, such as Fernando Collor de Mello and Fernando Henrique Cardoso, who had the job to sell state companies, close sponsorships for culture and arts, including photography. Private companies arrived in Brazil to occupy this cultural space that was left open after the National Institute of Photography was closed. And the neoliberal system strengthened itself, forcing these agencies to close its door and the government to not promote anymore the consolidation on photography that was occurring during the 1980s, leaving the photographers to seek jobs inside newspapers, magazines, as a freelancers again, and with support of the government in minor sponsors, minor grants. Some of these photographers can be briefly mentioned here, such as Walter Firmo, a photographer whose collection was purchased last year by Instituto Moreira Salles, a financial group and owner of Moreira Salles Bank, a shareholder of Unibank. So this financial group institution now owns his work and will use it for its own desires. Firmo photographed using color with the main theme of religions festivals throughout the national territory, and was one of the directors of the National Institute of Photography during the 1980s. Orlando Brito, who briefly participated in these movements, even though he continued to photograph for the press, he was a great creator of political image of Brazilian military dictatorship with subjective meanings that led us to representation of the Nazi rise, as is the case of the portrait of Brazilian President Ernesto Geisel with an outstretched arm, similar to Hitler, next to the statue of the Imperial Eagle, and the cropped portrait of the general with the press armband, showing the control of press made by the military itself in Brazil, restricting freedom of speech at the time. Luis Umberto was one of the great participants of the National Institute of Photography. He was a photographer within the Brazilian Congress, capturing comical images of Brazilian authorities and ripping their heads off in frames out of indignation at the military government of the time. He was one of the first photographers to form the basis for university photographic education in Brazil in the late 80s. He also supported several photographers looking to work on long-term projects. Evandro Teixeira, much like Orlando Brito, produced several iconic images of these moments of dictatorship in Brazil, such as the police repression in Rio de Janeiro, the emergence of drug trafficking in the first favelas, and the coexistence with violence in cities like São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. These themes were documented for the first time here as a consequence of the regime. Pedro Marcinelli, who was one of the photographers for Veja magazine, left the magazine to dedicate himself to documentary work in the north and northeast of Brazil, together with indigenous communities. His work after the 1980s turned. He was a news photographer, and in the late 80s, he began to photograph long-term subjects, like the most of this generation. He was aiming to be recognized by artistic spaces. Sebastião Salgado himself, who in the 1970s worked as a photojournalist at the Magnum agency, began to carry out long-term work on a global scale. And at this point of my thesis, some questions come in contact with his work. He was a photographer with a trajectory of international relevance in Brazil, at the same time that all these structural changes in photography were taking place. His work was initially recognized in France and had only recently gained popularity in the United States with his work Genesis, moving towards the search for artistic legitimation as well, that so many photographers sought throughout the 1980s in Brazil. His work in Serra Pelada in the state of Pará in 1986 was published in several weekly magazines in Germany, United States, France, and Brazil. This work was the first photographic work exhibited within the Museum of Contemporary Arts of Rio de Janeiro, promoted by the National Institute of Photography. Salgado was not the only one to photograph this gold mine, where hundreds of thousands of Brazilians left their cities in search of wealth. It is a literal representation of neoliberalism in Brazil, no labor rights, inhumane work, and the pursuit of individual enrichment. Some Brazilians photographers went to the same scene with authorization of the Brazilian army to photograph these scenes in color. Juca Martins and Miguel Rio Branco are some of the names that went to Serra Pelada, both without the funding from the World Bank that Salgado had at the time. Miguel Rio Branco is an example of color photography in Brazil until today. He was working for Magnum agency at the time. Some people are so used to know Serra Pelada from the black and white view of Salgado's work, and it is hard to find colored photographs of this gold mine like Rio Branco did. Salgado is representative of the theme of my thesis, and it is part of the engine in this neoliberal system based on photography. Inevitably, he inserts himself into it, and even though he's not directly responsible for the misery, hunger, and destruction he has recorded, several Brazilian photographers began to photograph in black and white for practical reasons of the partial absence of colored films in Brazil in late 80s. Some continued to photograph in black and white because of him, and as is the case of Lalo de Almeida, with this picture, who recently won support from Eugene Smith Foundation and is a winner of WordPress Photo Award this year for the records of deforestation in the Amazon forest during the Bolsonaro government. Lalo de Almeida recorded the continuity of what began with the Brazilian military dictatorship and materialized with Bolsonaro government, the exploitation of indigenous lands and the devastation of the Amazon forest, aggressive mining in search of gold, and the social inequality provided by this neoliberal system. From black and white photographs similar to the past, we continue to see recurring themes of the dictatorship resurface in Brazil. This is a photograph by Lalo de Almeida taken last year, which represents one of the lines of the Minister of Environment in Brazil during the current far-right government of Bolsonaro. The line that the minister said is "Let the cattle pass." This means that the government itself encouraged illegal deforestation for the opening of soy plantation and exploitation by livestock of cattle in a region of indigenous environment protection. Salgado in particular photographed for these companies that were financiers of this type of devastation. These authorities are part of the promotion of social vulnerability that were photographed in the past. So there is this question that I am working right now in my thesis that was discussed on Professor Blake's seminar last year, which I'm still digesting, that there is a network of other professionals who also saw inequalities with the same magnifying glass in black and white photography in a similar way to its subjects, in exchange of constant looks and photograph that seeks to enter the subjective field of those who watch it, to reach artistic legitimacy and make contact with authorities that can make a practical change in the lives of people in vulnerable situations, such as those that we just saw. Such authorities, however, are part of the main promoters of the violence recorded and documented by these photographers, closing a loop of social denunciation and conjuring the innocence of neoliberal institutions by directly or indirectly supporting photographic works by exempting themselves from the responsibility of the problems that neoliberalism generated in Brazil after the 1980s, thus closing a cycle of perpetuation of problems in our neoliberal society with the continuation of contemporary slave, environmental devastation, promotion of social inequalities, among other problems. Many photographers participated indirectly in the system, receiving financial support from mining companies, banks, and the Brazil federal government itself, some seeking artistic legitimation by authorities, and others taking the opposite path of the system, as is the case of Carlos Carvalho, who is here with us. I think Carlos can correct myself if I'm wrong, but he and João Roberto Ripper, who also is a photographer, also navigates opposite to this neoliberal support, where photographers can that quit independent agencies and started working directly with the vulnerable population, either being with its own money or with funds by donations and selling photographs to companies that do not align with this situation. So I will end my presentation here to give the photographer Carlos Carvalho some space to talk about his work developed with some of these themes without the support of these large financial groups. As a counterpoint to what we saw earlier, he's a photographer, has worked in the United States and Brazil as a freelancer, and is currently the organizer of Porto Alegre's International Festival of Photography, similar to international festivals that take place in different parts of the world, such as the Houston International Festival of Photography. I hope we have something to discuss because my work is still under construction, and today I brought to you an overview of topics that I will address in my thesis. So thank you for the opportunity to share my work with you, and thank you, Carlos, for being here with us. Please feel free to introduce yourself and talk more about your work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caio, and thank you, Carlos, again for joining us from so far away. I know it's later for you, so we really, really appreciate it. Thank you. You're muted. Sorry, you're muted, Carlos.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, Caio, for this special opportunity. I want to thank, I see Charles Monteiro here, and I want to thank you also, and Blake Simpson, and this possibility of University of Illinois at Chicago. I will try to be very quickly in my presentation. I'm very happy with the points that Caio brought to us, especially trying to show the picture of the scene of the photography in Brazil, the independent photography that was built there. Just making a context, I was born in 1957. 7 years later, we had a coup in Brazil and military dictatorship was established. So I grew up in a dictatorship environment. It was not difficult to make a path, make a decision about what you want in your life or what the horizon you want to go in your career. And I was very lucky in my career because I started my career during the democratization of the country. So I learned to make photographs. I learned to make photojournalism. And I learned how to understand the political scene during this period of democratization of the country. And after many documentary works on many different subjects, the Amazon was one of the very important ones. As Caio said before, the military had a project, special project for the Amazon. I want to just recover some slogans from the dictatorship. They had this slogan of the Amazon area as a land without people that should be offered for people without land. That was their proposal for agrarian reform. And this proposal was supposed to occupy Amazon by making deforestation for castling. So since there was very easy to understand what could happen in the Amazon and what side would have to choose. I know this is very strange, maybe to talk and say what side you take when you're doing journalism. But in this case, I think it was very clear. We were under military dictatorship with many different projects for different regions in Brazil and the Amazon area. The idea was to occupy and not recognizing that there was people there. There was indigenous group living there. There was the rubber tappers living there since the beginning of the century. The rubber tapper that are the subject of my work and that I'm going to present to you had a very important role during the Second World War, producing rubber for the war because the Malaysian rubber plants was bombed by Japanese, cutting the supply of rubber for the war front. So this figure of the rubber tapper, the people, the rainforest people, was there. They are there for more than a century. I want to start to show the photographs. Will be easier for me to. I just want to go back here and show the cover. This is a digital version of the book. because this cover shows the rubber tappers preparing themselves in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, they go to the rubber trees to collect the latex for make rubber. In this picture, I constructed the scene because this is a very isolated work. They work isolated in forest. They don't work in the group. But following the conception of them, of making extractivist reserves to live there inside of the forest. So that was a collective group, that was a syndicate group, that was a cooperative group working inside of the forest. I decided to make, to create the scene to make the picture. So they are, oh, okay. And not only the social importance of their work, but the environmental importance of their work to keep the forest stand against the idea of put the forest down, deforestation. This picture shows the leaves on the floor. Very quickly, the Amazon soil is very weak. And what makes possible to have a rainforest there is the relationship between the trees, the leaves, and the soil. When the leaves goes to the soil and have the rainforest, becomes a sort of soap that make the nutrients go to the soil. If you cut down the forest, will be a desert there. This is where the rubber tapper lives. They live inside of the forest. And this idea of living inside of a forest is something that we just imagine, but we have no idea how it is. You don't go there to spend a day, you live there. That was my main objective. What means to live inside of the forest, live within the forest. And I was trying to get the complete idea of the place where they live. It's a familiar place. They live there, they produce there. This is a rare image of smoking the latex to produce the rubber. It's deep inside of the forest. This is the path inside of the forest. They call varadouro. They go tree by tree, cutting the tree, collecting the latex, and they go back to their house and smoke for conserve them, and then sell the rubber. That's the way they do. They make that little cut, they collect, and they go to smoke the rubber. I was trying to show the way this happens inside of the forest, but also how the difference between the rubber tapper organized among a syndicate or a cooperative, different of the rubber tappers that's been there for a century but not organized. And this picture for me represents this kind of rubber tapper, the weak side of the line production of the rubber. Some portraits inside of the ring. You see on the left they have a special knife for cutting the tree. And this is isolated work. I was walking with him this day to photograph him doing his job, and you can see light, but they go really dark night, 4 o'clock in the morning, in order to collect the light, because if they go late, the humidity of the forest becomes warm after 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and the latex goes bad. This is a window of soldier of the rubber. When the war, in Second World War, as I said, the Malaysian plantation was bombed. United States made a deal with Brazil to buy all the natural rubber from Amazon. And the Brazilian government had a promise to the rubber tappers that they would be, after the war, they would be retired as a rubber soldiers, a special retirement. They all came from Northeast because you need a huge amount of people doing the job. And it was about 60,000 people from the Northeast of Brazil was moved to Amazon area in order to produce the rubber. After the war, the Brazilian government didn't accomplish the promise, and as always before, let them inside of the forest. So she's holding a picture of her husband, and there is a caption there saying rubber soldier and the date he was dead, 1943. Some aspects of inside of the house of the rubber tappers. The way they use the natural farm inside of the forest, the way they use the plants, medicinal plants. Some natural scenes in the city of Chapuí, which is close to, that was inside of the one community, inside of the forest. The way they build themselves to make to have a better life, a lighter life, having water coming from the river, but collect the water inside of the kitchen. This is I forget the name. This was a project made by a cooperation between the cooperative of the rubber tappers and the Pirelli factory of tires in São Paulo. Pirelli was buying all the rubber from the rubber tappers in Chapuí, and Pirelli made a special line of green tires with this rubber. This is the factory of Pirelli in São Paulo. I was there to complete the documentation. This is a tire. So many years of many tires came from deep inside of Amazon rainforest. This is the road 364, became famous because it was the road that was built by the militaries and was devastating the far west of Brazil, going up to Amazon. And first was in Mato Grosso, state of Mato Grosso, and then state of Rondônia. When it was in Rondônia, make a huge destruction of the forest. That was the sign for Chico Mendes. When he heard about what was going on in Rondônia, he went there to take a close look to the destruction of the forest, and that warned him to be prepared because the road was going up to the state of Acre, where he lives, where the stories that I'm telling you happening. This is a Brazilian nut tree, and the rubber tappers call this cemetery of Brazilian nut tree because the nut tree, ironically, is protected by law. It cannot be cut down, and the farmers would cut the forest, and without the forest, the Brazilian nut tree cannot produce because it's very high, 30 meters of high. And the insect that pollinizes the tree has not autonomy to fly up there. It needs the forest to make a scalar path up to the tree. So without the forest around the Brazil nut tree, there is no fruit. That's why the Rabatapa is called the cemetery of Brazil nut tree. This is one image that's very common about Amazon, destruction, burning. Now, Caio showed the Lalo picture that was 20, 30 years ago. Lalo shows almost the same. So we are repeating in a deeper and stronger way of destruction of the rainforest. This is wood factories. This is the way the illegal deforestation is made. They don't care if they're stuck in the rivers. They just build these illegal roads and bridges in order to pass with the trucks carrying, the trees. This is. I went there. It was only possible to go to this place because I was with the federal police that was looking for, because someone told them there was this huge deforestation. It's very far away. It's very deep inside of the forest. Would not be able to go there with special truck and boat. This is one of the workers of the place. This is the Brazil nut tree, and just a very short comment. Rubber-toppers lives by the rubber, and then when the winter comes to Amazon, and we call the Amazon winter, it's the raining season. Rainy season, the rubber tree doesn't let the latex go, so the harvest is start the harvest of the Brazilian nut tree from December to March. This case, he's not collecting the Brazil nut tree. He's collecting leaves in order to be sent to special university. Caio, me ajuda? Centro de pesquisa. Researching place in University in São Paulo. So this is a new generation of rubber topper that cuts the tree, makes the rubber, collects the Brazilian nut tree, but also participates in scientific research in the Amazon. He learned how to make the Brazilian nut tree be cutting inside of the forest on the left, on the right, be carried by animals. They collect inside the forest, they carry on the animals, they go to the closest city, which is Chapuri, in state of the Acre, in order to sell the Brazil nuts to the commerce in Chapuri. This guy is not using this for hunting birds, but he's Caio, me ajuda aí, como é que é o nome daquela história de levantar, de fazer rapel? Como é que fala rapel em inglês? Sorry, people. Rappel. Yeah. This guy is the same that was up in the tree collecting the leaves. He's lancing the guide of the rappel rope. Here he is. And there is here is another very important point for me in this documented work, is because the projection of the education side of the forest, and that was a main turning point for them. The rubber toppers did not know how to read and write and make basic math. So when Chico Mendes realized that, they start to build a special project of education inside of the forest based on Brazilian educator Paulo Freire's method. And that was the first time they could learn how to read and write, make the basic calculations, basic math, and that simple change made them more autonomous before the commerce of rubber and Brazil nut. They were able to not be, they could have the right payment for the right amount of rubber, right amount of Brazil nut. So these schools are still be inside of the forest. First was for the adults and then for the kids. And the name of the book is Poronga. Poronga is the same name of that kerosene lantern that I showed before. Also some health cares inside of the schools. And this picture for me is the opposite of the picture of the rubber topper carrying all that heavy rubber in his back. This is an autonomous rubber topper registered in the syndicate and the cooperative, and he owned his production. The same way we did with photography. We own our negative, we decide the price, we sell for who we wanted, and decide where to go. And on the far west, just finishing my presentation, they don't have rubber trees, they have Brazil nuts, but very deep in the forest. And the main production there is mandioc. They live inside the forest, they do their collection of other products that's not commercialized, like rubber and Brazil nuts, but the main production there is manioc flour. Just finishing my talk. I said before, I was lucky that I was learning how to photograph and how to understand what's going on politically in Brazil, because I was starting my career during the re-democratization of the country. But also, I was one of 7 agents that Caio mentioned before, Angular agents. And that gave us very independence of what to choose, what subject to document, and who to sell. And how we made that. We used to make commercial works for our age, for my case, for Angular. And get money together. And when I saw that I have a good amount of money that could let me go to the Amazon and make the trip and make the documentation, that's the way we were doing, because we're not have financially for anyone. And also this gave us more independence in our decision. So in one hand, yes, you make a commercial work. It's always like that. There is no. But in the other hand, you choose the way you want, you keep your career, the way you want to have some subjects being documented. That was one way that we found, because I agree with Caio, the options was to work for regular press and have arguments with them many times, or have the financial from some institution that would obviously choose the work that we have to make for them. So in order to have complete independence, and of course, and on the other hand, you have difficult to publish this image. But we start to find independence publishing from syndicates, from many publications that was out of the large medium that could show the work and make these photographs, these body of works, available for the communities also. So they could use it, the images, themselves for their best, and the way they could, we would give them freedom for that. So that also made us very close to them. I spent 10 years going back and forth to Amazon, but most of that I stood long time with them. I slept in my hammock for many days, for many nights inside of the forest. I was received by them. So it was a very different relationship between the photographers and the communities when you were and you are independent. Of course, you paid a price for that, but I have no regrets. I'm very happy with the job that I've done and the relationship that I built with these communities. So I think this is it. Thank you very much again for the opportunity. Thank you, Caio. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Carlos.
Sorry for the long talk.
No, wonderful.
Oh, no worries.
Great.
Thank you so much. Carlos, Caio, I wondered if maybe Caio, you have some questions for Carlos before we actually open the floor to other questions from the audience, or if there's a topic you wanted to converse about, please feel free.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask Carlos about how much longer he spent going back and forth, but he just answered it. So his talk was perfect for me. I don't have anything to ask for him. We talked about this work a lot of times. So I just want to thank you, and well, anyone that have any questions for Carlos, he's available as well. So feel free.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I am assuming, Carlos, that the pictures you showed us showed that the people, their standard of living was enhanced. Is that correct? By their work with the rubber during the war?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Was the standard of living of the workers, was it enhanced? Did it improve because of their work?
A qualidade de vida deles melhorou por causa do seu trabalho?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Thanks for the
Yes.
question. Thank you very much for this question. Of course, this is an example of a community in state of the Acre on the far west of the Amazon, where the Chico Mendes, the syndicalist and environmentalist, was there leading them. But yes, because there was a social organization, but also economic organization. And this organization was built inside of a cooperative created by Chico Mendes and his fellows. So they could afford to make a better quality of rubber, to make a better contracts with factories of rubbers, like Pirelli. They could have a better price. And this goes deep inside of the forest, because I was just talking about this with Caio 2 days ago. I was there when they were able to buy radios. Como é que chamam radioamadores, Caio? Amateur radios.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they had the central station inside of the cooperative, and they installed the radios inside of the forest.
Huh.
Some communities inside of the forest, you walk like 6 hours, 7 hours in order to reach the small village of Chapuri.
Wow.
So they could, and what that means for them, it means that they would not anymore be have to walk to the city in order to know what's the price of the rubber or the price of the Brazil nuts, when was the best time to bring them to the city, because that demands animals to care, demands time to prepare this location. And also it was an improvement on the schools, was improvement on the quality of their house. Like I showed, there was a group of concerns inside of the cooperative that would make their lives be better on social meaning and better economical. Thanks very much for this question.
Other questions for Carlos or Caio? Blake?
Yeah, this is it's a little bit of a broad question, and it's kind of speculative. So the question is really, there's been a fair amount of discussion recently about the concept of eco-fascism. And basically the idea is, for those who don't know the concept, it's the right-wing appropriation of the idea of environmentalism or ecology being used as a cudgel, as a way to persecute indigenous populations, immigrant populations, and so on, essentially blaming people like those you photograph, Carlos, for ruining the environment and laying the blame on them. And so this has not really been Bolsonaro's move, as far as I can tell. Just like in this country, it was not Trump's relationship to the idea of the environment. But you see it cropping up in other parts of the world. And I guess the question is, are there any signs in Brazil that it could flip in that direction, right? That you could take the deforestation of the Amazon and start to use that for right-wing, fascistic, anti-indigenous, anti-immigrant ends. Again, very speculative, but I just thought I'd throw it out to see if there's any thoughts about that.
Yes, unfortunately, it's happening right now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, even the president is blaming the rainforest people for burning the forest. They are blaming the indigenous for not taking care of the forest. It's unbelievable. It's something, I don't know how to describe that, but Blake, you went to the point. This is already happening in Brazil, and very difficult to deal with that. And you pointed one thing that I forgot completely. What is a rabatapa? It's a man that was born in the northeast of Brazil, and then he was moved inside of the forest. And who taught him, who showed him how to survive inside of the forest? The indigenous group. So there was interaction, not a good one in the beginning, because it was a shock of a culture of a white man with indigenous men inside of the forest, but they learned it with the indigenous group. And we talk about the rabatapa, and I was talking about my work, but the indigenous group now in Brazil are the biggest target of the right wing of our present government, because they are there. The rabatapas are inside of the forest for more than a century. They know, they have the knowledge how to live in the forest. But the indigenous people are there, the original people are there for 3,000 years, maybe. So they are the people who kept the forest stand. They know how to do that. And now they're being accused of the opposite. It's a very, like you said, like it's a very eco-fascism. It's really scary It's really scary.
And my guess would be we're going to be seeing a lot more of it moving into the future as the environment continues to degrade. It becomes a kind of easy scapegoat, easy way to consolidate power, et cetera.
Yes, they took these last 4 years of demonstration to completely change the structure of the government. They put it down all the official states that would take care of the forest. The Indigenous Fundação Nacional do Índio, National Foundation of Indigenous, that was not good, and now you see how important it was. No, the Brazilian Institute of Environment, IBAMA, Instituto Brasileiro de, all the structure of the state was taken by this demonstration and gave to people to make a completely change in their policies. So the part of the government that should take care of the environment is not doing that. The part of the government that should take care and protect the indigenous is not doing that. Also, and that's bad, a lot of license for mining, for golding, for whatever. So the idea is to have the last attack to the indigenous group in Brazil and also to the rainforest. And just one more comment. Even if we change the government, and I hope we do, and I really hope anyone, but not Bolsonaro, is going to take a time until we can rebuild the country, rebuild everything, because the structure of the state was really taken by them. We have close to 12,000 militaries work inside of the government structures. They taking care of mining companies, they take the mining minister, they taking care of environment minister, they're taking care of indigenous minister. They're taking care of everything. So it will not easy to change this by overnight. The next governor, next president, we have a huge work to rebuild everything again.
Oh.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Wow.
Yes. I don't like this mood that I'm saying to you, but that's the reality. And the other side, the good thing of this is we know how to do the best in the Amazon. We already know there are proposals that was being there, that was built, that was working. Extractivist reserves, indigenous reserves, by all means. So we know how to do it. It will be a political step, will be a political will, will be a political willing of the next president, because the examples we have already, we know how to do that. And that's the good part of this reality, you know.
We have
So you have to know the worst and expect the best.
Yes, we've been like this for the last 5-6 years. Yes. It's no time. There's no time anymore to be naive. You know, there is no excuse anymore to be naive. So,
right.
We know how to do it. We have examples. We have things that work it out. And
It's like there's a question, Emmanuel, from Margarita.
can you hear me again?
So this is from Margarita Saona. I have a question about your thesis, Caio. I totally understand how photojournalists and documentary photographers can be co-opted by neoliberal organizations and by military governments. And I do believe the work of independent photographers is essential, but do you think that the images could be re-signified and have a life beyond the context in which they were created? I am thinking of images published in the official Peruvian newspaper during the Fujimori dictatorship, for example, and how they are being used by human rights organizations in present times.
Perfect. Thank you for the question, Margarita. Yes, I think so, but this will happen if the photographer has control of his photographs. When the photographs are sold by banks or corporations, they have the control and of the use of these images. So these images are locked in the hands of these neoliberal organizations. But I think in Brazil, we still have a lot of photographers that have worked during the military dictatorship as independent photographer, freelancers. So they still have the control of their negatives and the possession of the image. And yes, these images can be used for another purpose instead of just perpetuating this neoliberal logic. Yeah. I think Sebastião Salgado have one point of this work that was not understood or was critic about it, that have a point of environmental preoccupation, but the work was founded by gold mining companies, so all the arguments fall apart. But we have a lot of other photographers that did a job similar to him or better to him about any other type of themes that was occurring during the military dictatorship, such as the life of indigenous people, how we live inside cities like São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, denouncing these themes, denouncing these problems, these social problems. And yes, they can be used again in the future and in the present. Some politics are buying photographs from the past to show people how this occurred as a move, and I think this is good in some way. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think this is it.
I was thinking about something similar because I just read an article about the presence of Mexico in the Venice Biennial. Sort of, I think the title was like denouncing Mexico, but getting forgiveness from Mexico or something like that. And I always think about the ways in which the national governments, when it comes to these types of exhibitions, they co-opt this artists and sometimes entire aesthetics to clean their hands. So with what Margarita mentioned, and just to continue this theme, I wondered if you have investigated a little bit more into it, or maybe sort of like Carlos and his colleagues, how they have dealt with that tension of feeding themselves, but also existing in the edges of that violence when trying to balance it.
I understood. This is a paradox question, because the National Institute of Photography in Brazil was built by the same photographers that was fighting against the government. So this is something that we need to think about. I talked with Zeca Araújo. Zeca was a Rio de Janeiro photographer. He died last year, unfortunately, but he was a creator of the National Institute of Photography. And he was the first person to say, and for the photographers that was learning in Brazil, that they had to have the possession of their negatives, and they have to have freedom to publish wherever they want. And the federal government didn't want to keep their images or to manipulate the way these photographers were producing. On the contrary, they were incentivizing them to keep producing and keep publishing, trying to give a way for young photographers to have something to begin with, like grants and courses and trips to go to another country like France and United States to read about and learn about other photographers. So in Brazil, this didn't happen. I don't know, Carlos, if you know anything that happened in this way, that if the federal government used some photographers for his benefits during the military dictatorship.
Yes and no, because they didn't really know how to use image by that time, in a way that there is a very famous video that shows the President Médici in the Amazon inaugurating the Trans-Amazon Road, a road that was supposed to cross Amazon from west to east. It was a huge road that brought a lot of problems. The video shows him besides the huge Amazon Brazilian tree cut it. He was proud of that, showing the inauguration of the road. So they are not good in using the images. And some photographers, I just want to make a comment about that. Some of photographers work for the large media, and some work for magazine that was supporting the military dictatorship. They were doing their job in the magazine, but also they were doing their personal work. And as always, the photographer looks for the image, for the picture. And like I heard the comment before, how the picture have been used by some NGOs of human rights. That's correct. You always make a bit of work that was possible by this original support, but at the same time you're doing the job and the image that you want to do. We didn't have any relation with the Brazilian government. When we have the National Institute of Photography, that was almost that was something very different, special inside of the Brazilian art. Photography in Brazil wasn't related to the art field, was always related to the documentary and photojournalism. The art field became in the late 80s, 90s. Today is very strong. We have special art fairs, especially of photography in Brazil. Many of international galleries, Gagosian, White Cube, all of them comes to Brazil. And during this art fair, there was a international connection. The Brazilian photographers now can reach the international market of art photography. But that was not the case. The case was documentary and photojournalism. So when the institute was created, that was a huge step. And we were surprised that it was possible to create at that time. It made a very important it was very important because they create the weeks of photography that was moving to different states and different cities in Brazil that helped to find new talents in photography. It was very important. So the state was doing his job. On the late of 80s, beginning of 90s, that was stopped. And when Fernando Collor de Mello was elected, he closed. So what happened? The photographers themselves organized themselves in encounters and festivals and took the place of the state. I helped to organize one festival in the city of Porto Alegre, and we say that we are the sons and the daughters of the week of photography led by Funarte, the Institute of Photography. So we learned with state how to organize the photography community, and then we became independent when the state get apart from the idea of supporting art or whatever in photography. So I see Brazilian photography always independent from the state in any case. And we have also a lot of influence of foreign photographers. Claudia Andujar, she presents herself in Brazil, but she's from Switzerland. She came to Brazil. She went to the Yanomam indigenous group, became famous of that. But she came from Brazil, escaping from Europe. And these foreign photographers helped to build this idea of documentary work and for journalism in Brazil. So I see the Brazilian photographers always independent from the state. And I think that's good. I think that's very good. Gave us our own language and our own idea of what we need to do as photographer and as photography community.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you so much. Are there any comments or questions for Caio and Carlos? Blake?
Yeah, I could just pick up on that thread and try to weave into it slightly from the flip side of it. So one of the ways that we think of neoliberalism as a category is that it's tied to the idea of the not the elimination of the state for sure, but the breakdown of many state functions, particularly those state functions that serve a welfare state function. And one argument that sometimes is made is that one of the tools that really enabled the neoliberalization of the state, the breakdown of the welfare state functions, is the rise of NGOs as a sort of parastate or substitute for state functions. And of course, when we think about Sebastião Salgado in particular, we think about his relationship to Médecins Sans Frontières, right? Doctors Without Borders, as being, central to his entire mission. So the question would be really, is there, in addition to the productive distance from the state that has become central to the documentary photography idiom, could we also say that there is a part of that separateness from the state that gets aligned with the mission of neoliberalism in terms of breaking down key government functions that provide welfare state-like benefits? And just to add one other factor to this, it seems to me that the Brazilian literary critic and social theorist Roberto Schwartz, his writing on Caetano Veloso in particular, I think of, and on tropicalismo, tropicalia, is a particularly useful in this vein, because what he talks about is specifically the new left turn to an aesthetics of nature that is independent from the state as being a vital tool for the emergence of the hegemony of the military dictatorship in the 60s and 70s, because it linked itself, and this is something that's way above my pay grade in terms of understanding the history of how this all works, but you Brazilians will have a much better sense of it. But it linked the idiom of tropicalismo's notion of nature with the idea of a capitalist independence from the social expectations of the welfare state that helped entrench the military dictatorship. So the question is, can we also think of that? Can we think the separateness of the photographic idiom from the state as having both a constructive, positive, politically progressive component, but that there might also be a component that is regressive or is linked up with the theme of neoliberalism that Caio raises in his presentation. Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, I think so. Like, for me, at this moment, I think this lack of states inside of photography is better for the production in Brazil at this time, because we didn't have that art washing that you spoke about in the comments, and we didn't have the control of the government by this image. During the military dictatorship, we haven't had any new green left party, for example. These social questions about the environment wasn't so strong back then. That was right now. So the photography work was denouncing that devastation, but the people around Brazil didn't mention it outside of magazines and outside of television, for example. So I think, I don't know if I understood completely your question, but I think the presence of the state is lacking in the photography. But during the military dictatorship, we neither have NGOs, for example, but we have banks, we have these great mining corporations and other corporations that was huge in Brazil. And back in 2016, they were just condemned for crimes during the dictatorship, for example, for money washing and etc. That was investing in culture, in arts, in photography, without the presence of this eye or this hand that controls what the photographer was going to do. I don't know if I answered your question.
May I have make a comment about that?
Please.
Blake, I think on the long term, we can realize that the construction of this independent photography supported by NGOs could make a special meaning after many years in the long term. But when you're doing that and you find financially support, I'm speaking for myself, but I think I can speak for many Brazilian photographers. It's very difficult to think of not doing because you might know how it ends, but I'm not sure you know. So in the long term, I think you're right. You can see now the consequence of that. And it's very strong because now these images are circulating in a very strong way. The diffusion today is stronger than it was 20 years ago. So in the long term, I think you're right. But I'm not sure if I would say no if I have this kind of support. There is a big discussion in Brazil about support of Vale do Rio Doce, a Brazilian company, to Sebastião Salgado, because Vale do Rio Doce was responsible for the two biggest environment. That's not accidental, that was criminal. And there was a lot of criticism about Vale giving support to Salgado and Salgado. I think that Vale, because of the destruction that makes, should be given more and more support. And the idea that they support the exhibition of Salgado, for me, it's not a bad one. I think they should give more. Because of destruction they promote, they give, on another hand, they give, this is a circulating circumstance. You don't stop the destruction, and on the one hand, on the other hand, you give money because you feel guilty. The best would be stop the destruction, stop the mine of the not caring way you do in the mine. That's the best. But we don't have the control of that. So if you don't have the control of that, but we do have possibility of make documentation that are important I know it's not comfortable for some photographers, but I don't point my finger to Salgado. Today, I think he made different, he chose different ways. But anyway, trying to answer your question, I think in the long term, you're right. The body of the work created today show us consequence that we cannot change.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I wouldn't want to point my finger at Salgado either. I just, it's more of a question for historians of photography rather than photographers working in the moment, because, we exist in the world that we have, and you don't really have a choice about that. But, from a historical perspective, it kind of invites a comparison between, say, the FSA photographers, working for the state, and then the, photographers like Salgado working for NGOs. And, what do we do with that comparison, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Many Brazilian photographers criticize him because I'm not one of them. I understand everything. And like I said, we live in this world. So if I can make my part and trying to do something in this, and if my part is built by supporting of someone that like Valley, I would not think about the destruction. I would think of how much they own me and how much they owe to the Brazilian society. So yes, I want your money. I want more than you can give to me. But that's my personal feeling.
Elise, you had a question?
Well, I don't know, just along the same lines, it does, so though, you had a dictatorship as the state when you're making this work, but when just the subject matter that you chose, showing indigenous people as workers with an autonomous position in the economy, strikes me as socialist, nice, adhering to the values of socialism. Like if you'd had a socialist state, you might have worked for them, but it made me wonder, like I know there was a viable socialist movement in Brazil in the 50s, right? Was any of that still around in your people you were talking to when you made this work with this emphasis? And just want to say one more thing too. I don't know, Caio, if Carlos is unique in your project, but that subject matter seems inherently hard for neoliberalism to appropriate, right? I mean, it's a compliment to you. Like the independent worker in the economy is not something neoliberalism likes to show or have us see or emphasize. So I think it's really inspiring just in its subject matter to say, I don't know how common it is. Anyway, I could go on and on, but let me ask you that about like socialist principles. Was that even like politically part of the conversation at the time?
Yeah, that the socialists during the 1950s in Brazil, they were crushed by the military dictatorship before '68. In 1968, we have the AI5 promulgation. That was a law prohibiting any kind of political discussion on the streets and schools, universities, etc. And the Communist Party was blocked inside of Brazil. But we had these engagements inside of the photographer's mind. They were born and they were created looking for this social denunciation themes that was looking forward towards these the socialist mind. So it is complicated to show indigenous people working with a mind of a socialist, because in a world of socialists, probably you will be working for them. But every photographer was aligned by the left, not the right during military dictatorship. And yes, Carlos is one of the photographers that I am working right now. I think I will use as well one part of Salgado's work as well, because Salgado's is aligned with this system of neoliberal, and Carlos is the opposite side of not having any kind of government money or any kind of neoliberal great or institution promoting his work. He's showing photographs that the government didn't want to see at that time, and today, at least, I think. Like Lano de Almeida, who won the World Press Photo Award this year, was showing pictures that literally came out of the mouth of Ministry of the Environment in Brazil, saying let the cattle pass and destroy the forests, and we don't give anything. I will say a bad word here, but I think Carlos Carvalho can say a little bit more about his influence of socialist and left-wing politics. But I think most of the photographers in Brazil were aligned in socialist principles, but during the practice of their lives, they sometimes work for neoliberal institutions, trying to denounce and working, and this is the world that we live in.
Yes, the relationship with the communities and their leaders and the organizations, the workers' organizations, they all have this socialism horizon of wish. I never did, not because I am a capitalist, because you read and you know what happened in other parts of the world. So you have to be very careful of what is the reality in your country. I don't see any possibility of a socialism, even communist could be established in Brazil. That's nonsense. Brazil, it's a capitalist country. The society is very conservative, and our history doesn't show any path to the socialism way. But of course, we want a better system that I would not call capitalism. And it was stronger, the feeling of have some socialism on the workers' organization. I would say it's not anymore. And Lula never said that he was a socialist. The great leftist leader of Brazil never spoke about socialism. He was always trying to, as he said, give a little piece of meat, rice and beans to the workers table in Brazil. So he was trying to build that old social fair that we had in Europe. That was the inspiration of Lula, not a socialism system, but in syndicates and in the rubber tappers. Chico Mendes was speaking out about socialism, and he would like to be in a country with socialism. I don't know how far that was, how deep that was inside of him. Maybe it was just speaking, the way of speaking, because he knew. I'm not sure that was something that was really important for the communities inside of the forest. They want only to live well, have a better life inside of the forest, not thinking about the system. That was something more related to the leaders. And today I don't see that anymore. I think the people are realistic of none of the systems are working on the humanity, not capitalism, not socialism. What we have in the world is not good anywhere. I'm sorry, but it's a truth. We have to change the whole thing. And the environmentalism, environment, the idea of being a part of the nature had to stop. No, and I know that I'm saying that looks like environmentalist speech, but it's not. It's something that I'm feeling now, and I think a lot of people feel that. People are more concerned about have a better life, have a better environment, have a better situation of people around them than the system. I don't think people knows or have an idea of what system would be good today. They know what's not good. All the system that was running. So, and as the comment you said that the work that was built in photography not find a place. Yes, I always say thanks to the internet, because today I can publish my work that was not possible to publish that time. But I think we really don't have this feeling of socialism anymore. We do have in the speaking way, but deep inside, I don't think anyone today would say we need to have a socialism or whatever, because all the experience that we had didn't bring the best we expected.
Did you feel that way when you were younger?
No.
Yeah.
But I never thought about socialism when I was younger. I just thought that we could have equality. That was the main idea, equality. We never experienced that. Some societies have experienced it. We never had. So seeing other societies that have equality, I thought that we could have that we must have that here. But today I'm not sure anymore about anything. I'm really concerned about the environment. I'm really concerned about the planet. I'm going deep on searching about my own work. But just a quick comment. Remember the first picture of the leaves on the soil? I found out last year, because I keep doing my research, that the nutrients that the leaves gives to the Amazon soil, it's not enough. And in the last 4 or 5 years, there is a satellite that circulates the Earth and take pictures of the meteorologist satellites. They discovered that dust of powder comes from the north of Africa and comes on the wind waves, cross the whole Africa, cross the Atlantic Ocean, and when it reaches the America, half of it goes down to the Amazon forest. The other half goes to the Mexican Gulf. And this dust brings, I forget the name, the element, that comes from a lake on the north of Africa. And this powder this dust brings to the rainforest another element that nutrites the Amazon soil. So we have this idea that Amazon is important to the planet, but the Amazon itself is fed by something that comes from Africa. So all this connection of the environment and the planet, for me, is now really important. And of course, the work that I did gives me more than I thought and I saw before. Each time that I see my pictures, I have some insights that I didn't have before. And as deep as I research about this connection of the planets, I really get happy about my work, because I was doing things that I was seeing and taking pictures of I was not seeing now. And now they are here because we have this information because the new technologies, and becomes more clear all these connections of the planet. So all this, it's too large, too big for we focus on political system. Of course, the political system is important because it defines and things, defines the future, defines. But I don't know. I was more. Today, I don't see any system that could really work without this concerning about the environment.
Thank you, Carlos. Are there any last comments or questions before we go? I want to thank Caio and Carlos for this amazing conversation. It gave us so much. Oh, Charles mentioned, I'm delighted to have participating in this research meeting at the University of Illinois, Chicago. I thank Blake Stimson and his colleagues in the department for providing space for the debate on Brazilian photography. I hope we can continue this debate at another time. And his web connections has been unstable. So yes, thank you to everybody. Thank you for an amazing conversation. And just a reminder, we are here one more time before the end of the semester. Next week is going to be a hybrid event. We're going to be in Henry Hall. It's the BA, MA Art History Symposium. So we have several of our students presenting. So make sure to log in, or if you're in Chicago, join us in person, again, 4 to 6 p.m. Central Time. Blake, thank you for helping us organize this. Atacan, thank you for all your help. And Caio and Carlos, thank you very, 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 very much for this amazing, amazing conversation.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much.
Good work.
Yes, thank you.
Well, talk to you soon, Blake. We keep in touch.
Sounds good. Yeah, we should meet one-on-one at some point. Just let me hear more about how your thing's coming along.
Yeah, sure. We have to do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you,
Talk to you
Atacan.
then. Yes, thanks, Atacan.
It's muted, Atacan.
You're muted.
Oh yeah, sorry. I will share the recordings with you after the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks.